Recent tests of the Canon R5 Mark II show some shocking results in autofocus performance. We'll also update you on the IBIS Wobble, the electronic shutter, Canon Log 2, and that rather strange whirling sound. That's right, folks, the thing that makes more noise than I do when I quietly try to eat chips during a movie. But before we get to the details, please subscribe to this channel. It doesn't cost you anything, helps this channel grow, and keeps you up to date on the latest camera coverage. There's an awful lot to cover off in this video. I'm going to start off with something small, something minor. The Canon EOS R5 Mark II has a tele light on the front of the camera, and that's perfect for situations like this when I'm in front of the camera and I can see that the camera's recording, that when I press record it hasn't stopped. However, we also see that red rectangle or that red border on the LCD, but it's not just on the LCD. If we're looking through the EVF, we also get that red border. Now with the R5 Mark I, what we used to get when looking through the EVF was just that little red circle, and it was always way in the top right corner. And the problem with that is, quite often, when I'm looking through, I couldn't always see because I'm not seeing the entire screen. And there were a few times where I realized I wasn't recording. With that red border, there's no missing it, whether you're looking through the EVF, the LCD, or you're in front of the camera like I am here. Peter McKinnon put out a video where he talked about the IBIS Wobble, that it's much reduced to where he just didn't see it.
For everything we shot during the Matt Barnes shoot, I didn't notice any significant IBIS Wobble at all. That's not to say it's not there, but I didn't notice that very specific warp.
And I agree, it is much reduced. I was out shooting with a Canon RF 24-105 f4, and I was shooting at 24 millimeters. Now, one of the nice things about shooting with the R5 Mark II is in the viewfinder, if you're shooting with a zoom, it actually tells you whether you're shooting at 24, 30, 34, 26. And that's really handy when you're not shooting wide open at 24 or all the way zoomed in at 105. You can actually know precisely the exact, well, focal length that you're shooting at. So if you're trying to replicate a scene and you want to make sure you're still at the same focal length, that's a definite improvement. Anyhow, so let's go ahead and cue up some video that I shot just the other day. While the IBIS Wobble is much reduced, it's still evident in this clip. Pay close attention. Did you see that? Now, if I speed things up, it's definitely more evident. And I'm happy to see that the IBIS Wobble is much reduced. It's still there. But I wonder if I'm being overly sensitive to it. Because of what I do, I'm more aware of these things than maybe the audience would be. When I'm watching a blockbuster movie, for example, it's pretty evident to me right away if they've, well, haven't exposed it properly, where they've had to bring up the midtones because, well, they didn't properly expose the scene. They just got it wrong, and I see this time and time again. It doesn't happen often, but you'll see it. You're watching the movie, and then all of a sudden, halfway through, there's this one scene where they didn't expose to bring in enough light, and they really ramp up those midtones, and, you know, I definitely notice it. Most people don't. So what I would like to do in a separate video, I want to go into detail. So, for example, what is the IBIS Wobble like with a 16 millimeter? Is it just as good as we saw here in this video clip? What is it like at 20 millimeters? What is it like at 26, 30 millimeters? Now, one thing I've noticed with the R5 Mark I is that the IBIS Wobble wasn't noticeable in any way whatsoever if I was shooting at 35 millimeters or zoomed in any further than that with any other lens. So stay tuned for that. That'll probably be coming up in the next couple of weeks, doing a deep dive into the IBIS Wobble. Is it reduced enough for you? What did you think? Here, let's cue the clip one more time. Are you really aware of what's going on here? Is this sufficient enough for you? Well, let me know in the comments section down below. The R5 Mark II, unlike the Mark I, comes with the electronic shutter as the default mode. And that should tell you one very simple thing, that Canon's very confident in their new electronic shutter that they've made it the default mode over mechanical. But there's something else that Canon did too. In electronic mode, we get the same bit rate, 14-bit RAW, that we do in mechanical, but we get it up to 30 frames per second. And with all the other improvements we get in this camera, the faster readout speed of, what is it, 10 milliseconds, 6 milliseconds? I can't remember, but it's significantly improved. It's twice that of the R3, so I think it's around 6. It used to be around 16. But also the autofocus system. We're going to talk about the autofocus system in a little bit, but yeah, electronic mode is the default mode. Now, one thing I did notice when the first time I took a shot is that the electronic mode wasn't silent. In fact, the sound it makes is a little bit like a chipmunk eating a nut after being up all night on caffeine. Let's go ahead and have a listen to it. Yeah. Does it sound like a chipmunk to you that's been up all night on caffeine? Let me know in the comment section down below. Now, I know some of you are going to say, oh, come on. The whole purpose is we want to be able to shoot silent. And I get that. Relax, because in the manual on page 285, Canon allows us to turn off the silent shutter function. But now let's turn our attention to the headline story of this video, the autofocus system. One thing I've noticed very quickly with the R5 Mark II is how shockingly fast and shockingly accurate it is with its new autofocus system. It's faster than the Mark I, but it's also faster and more accurate than the R3 and even the 1DX Mark III. I want to tell you a little bit about what it was like to shoot with a 200 to 800 millimeter. So we got a huge focal length here. I was shooting outside with the R5 Mark II. I shot with the RF 200 to 800 millimeter plenty of times with the Mark I. So I'm familiar with the speed and accuracy of the lens. But unfortunately on the Mark I, it could sometimes take a second or two before it locked onto focus, which was really annoying. But with the Canon EOS R5 Mark II, it's almost as though the lens has been upgraded, as though it got that L series. You see, when I held down that shutter button halfway at 800 millimeters, it instantly locked on, with the subject sharply in focus. The only negative, it's the end of August, so there isn't much wildlife, but a few sparrows, blackbirds, and this lucky spotting. Even the cobra chickens have flown away. But a friend shooting NASCAR in Daytona this weekend has been shooting with a Canon EOS R5 all day long, and says, when looking through the viewfinder, I can see the car. The R5 Mark II knows it's a car. I know I want to focus on it, so it stays focused. It will stay on the car as long as you keep that focus dot on it, inside the rectangle. It'll stay stuck on that car until I want it to switch to another car. A few weeks ago, I published a story about a whirling sound coming from inside the R5 Mark II. At this point, I didn't have the camera, so I couldn't comment on it. I could only report that several sources had told me that this is true. But then on Tuesday, I received the R5 Mark II, and I didn't check for it. I didn't notice it. I didn't notice it for several days. And then on Thursday, I received a comment, and I thought, you know, it's a good time to check it out. So what I did, I turned the camera on, and I held it up to my ear. Now, actually, believe it or not, I can hear it right here from the camera, but it's more pronounced if I hold my ear right here because the sound seems to be coming from here. And if I move the LCD out, it seems to be coming right from the very back here. And let me see if you can pick up on it. Can you hear that? I can certainly hear it from here. The whirling sound to me is like it's like a fan that's been more of a kind of mid to low frequency kind of bass sound. What's interesting is that we don't hear the sound on the R5, the Mark I. So that leads me to believe a couple of things. It could be related to the IBIS system. That's certainly possible. But the R5 Mark I also has an IBIS system. But there are several stories of other people on the R6 Mark II, and I believe the R3 also saying that they heard the sound, as well as the R5 Mark I. But again, I never heard the sound with the R5 Mark I. So it could be one of those things where, since we're hearing it from a lot of people and no one's saying they're not hearing it, it could be just a configuration setting that Canon can adjust in a firmware update. The other option is, if you recall, we have heat pipes. One at the bottom here that takes in the air and shoots it out the back. Now, it shoots it out the back if you have the cooling grip, the CF-R20 EP, I think it is. If you don't have the cooling grip, well, then you still have the airflow, but it's much slower, and it's just going from an area of high heat to it's just venting out the sides. So I'm really curious about this. This is one of those things that I think we might get addressed in a firmware update. I haven't called Canon yet for support, Canon USA or Canon Canada, for a very simple reason. And that reason is, well, I've called them twice already and they're not familiar with the camera yet. They haven't had a chance to read the manual. So I need to give them a bit of time. Otherwise, I'm just going to be on the phone for an hour or so and not really get to an answer. So the whirling sound is there. But again, shooting with a shotgun mic on top, it's not a problem. If you're shooting stills, it's definitely not a problem. And it's not loud enough that people around you are going to hear it, unless, of course, you're in one of those really super quiet spaces like a cathedral, and then maybe people standing next to you might notice it. This is my first attempt at grading Canon Log 2 footage. It's the same footage I used for the IBIS Wobble. I know it's not cinematic, it's not going to win any awards, but it does help me test how easy it is to grade Canon Log 2 footage. With the Canon EOS R5 Mark I, I really didn't have any trouble color grading with Canon Log 3. I wouldn't say I cheated, I used the Calibrite color grading card, and that allowed me to nail the white balance. It also allowed me to get the colors perfectly bang on. And then the last step I would do is raise the saturation level. But the problem with Canon Log 3 that I found is it didn't provide enough color information, or the way it recorded the log profile. You really kind of struggled a bit to get those skin tones, to get them to a natural level. Quite often involved bringing up the midtones as well as the shadows and the highlights. But quite often I ended up playing with either the highlights or the midtones and bringing them down a little bit, because some of the colors like the reds and oranges or yellows, well, they would come across as severely oversaturated. And when you're trying to get the face bang on, a winter jacket can look a little bit off. It can even appear red instead of orange. But if the skin tones are off, even a little bit, people notice. If the saturation's off, even a little bit, people notice. So, how well does Canon Log 2 do? Well, I think looking here at the skin tones, they look a whole lot better. But now it's time to turn our attention to overheating. The Canon EOS R5 Mark I, we certainly can't forget it. When it was announced back in July of 2020, well, I was one of the first ones to break news that this camera overheated, and it overheated a lot, even if you stuck it in the fridge. Now, Canon released firmware 1.1.1, which improved that, so if you were shooting in colder climates like Canada or in a fridge, you didn't have any overheating issues. But it wasn't until firmware 1.6 that basically you could shoot for, well, 2 hours, 3 hours. I don't think I went more than 2.5, 3 hours, but I could shoot at 70 degrees or 80 degrees Fahrenheit, which is somewhere up to around 27.546 degrees Celsius. The depth director even tested at 96 degrees. But what is it like to shoot with a Canon EOS R5 Mark II if you're shooting all day long as a photographer, or shall we say a hybrid photographer? What we're seeing today is about 60% of photographers are also being requested to shoot video as well. Well, primarily their source of work is their photography. I've got one particular friend who's down, again, the same one shooting NASCAR, where he's got a client saying, hey, I want to capture 8K 60. I want to capture 8K 30. So I thought, what a better way to address overheating than to talk to my friend. This weekend, it's 85 degrees in Daytona Beach. But there is one thing he's using. He's using the cooling grip. And if I was going to shoot in 85 degree temperature all day long, and I was at a camera store and somebody said, I'm shooting in these conditions, what should I do? I would highly recommend getting the camera grip, because whether you're shooting video or stills, it's going to help keep that camera cool. So here's what my friend said. I shoot all day long. I mean, the camera's on all day long. I'm constantly switching between shooting stills and video. Although I shoot mostly stills, but my clients also require 8K 30 and 8K 60 clips. And what my friend told me is that he never had the camera overheat. Now, we'd see that bar letting him know that it was getting a little bit warm, but he never had the camera shut off. He never had any flashing light indicating that the camera was imminently getting ready to shut down. All day long, 8 hours in 85 degree heat down in Daytona Beach. But there's something else my friend also told me about, and that's further backing up what I told you earlier with the autofocus system. If the R1 has the same autofocus as the R5 Mark II, the R1 will simply be groundbreaking, revolutionary. But I told my friend it won't be, because the Canon EOS R1 has cross-type autofocus on the sensor, whereas the R5 Mark II doesn't. What my friend was really looking forward to in the R1 is a camera that has a much more durable body, a go-anywhere that can be abused, and the R5 Mark II is a little bit more fragile in that regards. But the autofocus system, some of the things he told me is, so he's out there, he's shooting the cars as they're going by on the track. And if you've ever been to a NASCAR event, or if you've ever watched it on television, you'll see these rather large fences, chain link fences. And so when he's trying to grab a car, what'll happen is he sets it to vehicle autofocus. He's looking through the viewfinder, and there's a rectangle right around the car. I can't show you the footage, and there's a reason for this. It's all to do with copyright protection. If you're shooting video down at Daytona and you're a photographer or a videographer, well, there's a certain series of rights there. You cannot shoot video without getting permission from NASCAR because of, I can't remember, one body owns the rights. And so you have to pay a license. So I can't show you any footage, and that rectangle is based off of a focus dot. So he's moving along, he's keeping that focus dot in the rectangle, but as soon as he moves that focus dot off to another car, the autofocus system says, okay, my source, my friend, wants to track that car and automatically locks onto that car. He says it's absolutely brilliant, but not only the ability to focus cars, but if you're looking through the chain link fence, it's not going to focus on the fence and then alternate between the fence post and the car as the car goes by. It's thinking like us. It's focused on the car. It's able to ignore all that other stuff. And I think all this boils down to that digic accelerator chip, the machine learning that Canon's talked about in their autofocus systems for the R1. We're seeing it in the R5 Mark II. And it goes back to all those patent applications that I talked to you about earlier this year, saying that the autofocus system in the R5 Mark II and the R1 is going to get a significant update. And it's huge. I couldn't believe that when I had the 200 to 800 millimeter set to 800 millimeter connected to the camera, I looked up and everything was completely out of focus until I half pressed that shutter. And what I was expecting is it would slowly move, it would pulse back and forth as it sometimes does, and then it would get focus. No, it was like, bam, instantly. I'm talking about 1/10 of a second to 2/10 of a second. That's how fast it was. The autofocus system in the R5 Mark II, I don't want to say revolutionary. It's a huge evolutionary jump over the Mark I. And if you've been looking at the reviews of the R5 Mark II and thinking you don't see a whole lot of improvements for you, I'm going to speak to photographers here, not videographers. If you're doing portraits and you generally only ever have one subject in the view, you don't need the R5 Mark II. But if you're shooting multiple subjects or a subject with multiple other objects or subjects around, whether it's people, whether it's cars, whether it's animals, the autofocus system in the R5 Mark II is a huge step forward. It's going to greatly improve your hit rate, and it's not going to go pulsing and hunting because something else gets in the frame, or even such a thing as a fence. It's a really huge update. I regret that I'm not out there shooting 8 hours a day every day of the week. I have a day job and we're back to work 50% of the time. That really cuts down on the amount of time I can shoot. I've got that commute time now that eats into my day. Yesterday I couldn't shoot at all. I could script, but that was it. I couldn't shoot. And Thursday I was very limited in what I could shoot as well. But it's Saturday at the time of recording. After I'm finished recording, I'm going to go edit. And then I'm going to go outside again. I'm going to take the 24 to 105 and I'm going to shoot something. I don't know what I'm going to shoot, but I want to get out there with this camera and enjoy it. Oh, and one other thing I noticed too is that the microphone, the internal microphone, doesn't pick up wind noise nearly as badly as the R5 Mark I. Even a slight bit of wind would just be like fingernails on a chalkboard. Whereas this thing here, we had about a 5 to 10 kilometer an hour wind. It was unbelievable. I was listening to it thinking, did I have the mic on at that point? And I didn't, because I remember I was outside going like, well, this footage is useless. Well, it's not useless. I just can't use the audio. But I could. And that's really impressive. And if you're interested in pre-ordering the R5 Mark II and you're thinking it's going to be months before it gets delivered, I can tell you that of the some 300 pre-orders of the R5 Mark II that went through B&H, I would say all but maybe 1 or 2 have been processed. And I say that because I can't see everything. But there were people that pre-ordered in just the last week, and those have cleared out as well, because the way it works with B&H is once a camera ships, it changes something on that item. It shows me what I could potentially get if that person doesn't return the camera. So that tells me it's at least shipped. Other sources, I don't get access to that information. So apparently Canon's doing a much better job of getting these out the door than they did with the Mark I. So if you don't have it shipped yet, I would expect before the end of this month is very good, very likely, but I wouldn't expect you'd have to wait more than a couple of weeks. And if you're interested in purchasing the Canon EOS R5 Mark II, it's no longer a pre-order, please consider using my links down below. While I do make some money from the ads from YouTube, it's like maybe 8 to 5%. It's really very little. I make a bulk of what I do off of the affiliate links and the pre-orders, and a big thanks to those of you that do use them. If you do use them for Adorama B&H or Amazon, it doesn't cost you anything. You don't have to fill in any codes or anything like that. It takes you directly to the website. And at the end of the day, you get a great camera. You get a great deal if you're buying something on sale. And I get a small fee back, which really helps support this channel. Best way to support the channel. You don't have to give me anything, but it happens through the process. Anyhow, thank you so much for watching to the end of the video. Have yourself a great week. Actually, no, I want to say a special thanks to my sources. My friend today, he reached out to me a little while ago and we've become friends, and it's just amazing how in the last couple of months, the amount of people that are reaching out to me, providing me information. This information isn't always leaked information from Canon. It's from people who had the camera early that are telling me what it's like to use this camera, and I appreciate that. People who have access to the supply chain that have provided me with information about the R5, the R1, the R6 Mark III. It's really greatly appreciated because I couldn't do this without you. And if you are thinking of reaching out to me, your anonymity is 100% guaranteed. However, I do recommend that you just use an email address that is new and doesn't, well, use your name in any way whatsoever, because when it comes to email, it's like snail mail. The email, if you send it to the wrong person, it's got a trail, right? So that's why I recommend doing that. But anyhow, thank you so much for tuning in. Have yourself a great weekend, and we'll see you again soon.